Air Force One landed in Beijing, and everyone applauded. But nobody asked the real question. Why now? Why like this? And why with so many people? Donald Trump just completed the most revealing trip of his presidency. Not because he was powerful, but because he was desperate. He arrived in Beijing on May 13th, 2026, surrounded by Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Jensen Huang, Larry Fink, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Citigroup, Qualcomm. The list goes on. The largest American corporate delegation ever sent to China in a single presidential visit. And do you know what it says when a president arrives with that many CEOs in his luggage? It says he does not have much left to offer on his own. Here is what mainstream media is presenting as a diplomatic triumph. An American president returning to Beijing for the first time since 2017, a summit meeting with Xi Jinping, a ceremony at the Temple of Heaven, a state banquet. Everything is staged to project strength. But let us look at the operational reality. This summit was supposed to happen in March. It was postponed because the United States and Israel launched a war against Iran on February 28, 2026. The Trump administration predicted a campaign of 4 to 6 weeks. We are in May. The war is still going. The Strait of Hormuz is under a dual blockade. Energy prices have exploded. Gas prices in the United States have climbed sharply, and Trump's approval rating has fallen to historically low levels. So when Trump took off for Beijing, he was not flying from a position of strength. He was escaping a domestic situation that had become increasingly uncontrollable, and he was hoping Xi Jinping would throw him a lifeline. Look at the agenda for this 48-hour summit. Trade, Taiwan, artificial intelligence, the war in Iran, rare earth exports, semiconductor restrictions, Boeing aircraft orders, soybeans, beef, and the case of Jimmy Lai, the imprisoned Hong Kong publisher. Every major conflict between Washington and Beijing compressed into 2 days. This is not the agenda of a serene superpower commanding the world order. This is the agenda of a government trying to solve too many problems at once because it solved none of them in time. And experts themselves lowered expectations before the summit even began. The Council on Foreign Relations described the meeting as a simple attempt to stabilize the relationship, not to resolve its conflicts. Kyle Chan of the Brookings Institution was even more direct. Both sides want stability. Nobody is expecting major deliverables. The President of the United States crossed the Pacific not to impose an outcome, but to try to obtain one. Try, that is the key word. If you want analysis you will not find on CNN, on Fox or anywhere else, subscribe right now. Hit the bell, because what you just heard is only the beginning. Now, here is the part that almost no American media outlet wants to say out loud. 4 months before Air Force One landed in Beijing, another aircraft had already touched down there. January 13th, 2026. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, walked into the Great Hall of the People. He met with Xi Jinping. He met with Premier Li Keqiang. He met with Zhao Leji, Chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. And he did not come as a supplicant. He came with a precise brief. And he left with a concrete deal, a Canada-China strategic partnership. Well-defined pillars including energy, clean technology, agriculture, and forest products. A formal ambition to increase Canadian exports to China by 50% by 2030. And most importantly, China agreed to slash tariffs on Canadian canola from a combined rate of roughly 85% down to around 15%, a market worth $4 billion for Canadian farmers. Canola, lobster, crab, and Canadian peas were removed from the discrimination tariff list. According to the Prime Minister's office, the combined impact unlocked nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian workers and businesses. $3 billion. Without a trade war, without a 50 CEO delegation, without a state banquet. And do you know how Washington reacted to Carney's visit? Trump picked up his phone. He posted on Truth Social. If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. Governor Carney, not Prime Minister. Governor, a deliberate public documented insult. He threatened 100% tariffs on Canadian exports if Ottawa made a deal with Beijing. At Davos, when Carney warned against economic coercion by superpowers, Trump escalated further. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark. And he withdrew Canada's invitation to his so-called Board of Peace. Canada was punished for doing exactly what Trump was about to do 4 months later. Punished for going to Beijing, punished for signing the canola deal, punished for warning against economic coercion. And then Trump boarded Air Force One. Destination Beijing, with Musk, Cook, Huang, Fink, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, and the rest of the American economic elite, to ask Xi Jinping for exactly what Carney had gone to ask him for: access, purchases, cooperation, diplomatic leverage. The logic collapses completely. Here is the contradiction at the heart of American foreign policy, and nobody in mainstream media dares to name it clearly. When Canada engages China, Washington calls it dependency. When the United States engages China, Washington calls it leadership. When Ottawa signs an agricultural deal worth billions for its farmers, Trump threatens economic warfare. When Trump arrives without a deal, carrying the largest corporate delegation in modern memory, hoping Beijing will help him escape a war he himself started, the official language becomes state diplomacy. This double standard cannot hold. Either engagement with China is acceptable, in which case Carney was right and Trump's threats against Canada were illegitimate, or engagement with China is unacceptable, in which case Trump's own summit with Xi is a strategic surrender. It cannot be both. And yet that is exactly the contradiction now sitting at the center of American foreign policy. One rule for the United States, another rule for everyone else, including America's closest ally. What you are hearing right now is the analysis that the American media complex buries under ceremonies and handshake images. Subscribe, share this video. Every share is a crack in the wall of misinformation. Now let us look at how Beijing is reading this moment, because this is where things become truly alarming for Washington. Chinese state media spent the week reminding the world that it was Trump who delayed the summit because of the Iran war. They reminded the world that Iran's foreign minister was in Beijing just last week. They reminded the world that Vladimir Putin was expected in Beijing within days of Trump's departure. The message is crystal clear. China is presenting itself as the center of a new global diplomatic geometry, and the American president is only one of several leaders passing through that space. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea are watching Washington divert its military resources from the Pacific toward the Middle East. Germany and France are watching the Iran war drag on far beyond every early prediction. India continues buying Russian oil despite American sanctions threats. And Canada is already 4 months ahead of Washington in opening a new commercial channel with the world's second-largest economy. The wall Washington spent years building around Beijing now has doors in it. And Canada, America's closest ally, was the first to walk through one. There is one final point nobody wants to address directly: Taiwan. Trump signaled he intends to raise the Taiwan issue with Xi. He even suggested he might discuss American arms sales to Taipei. Analysts in Washington and Taipei are already sounding the alarm. One sentence in the wrong room could reshape the Taiwan question for an entire generation. Trump has a habit of speaking off script, and in a room with Xi Jinping, that habit could be extraordinarily costly. Canada carefully avoided that minefield in January. Carney did not touch Taiwan, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that Canada's immediate interest was trade, not geopolitical entanglement. That is the difference between governing and performing. One leader went to Beijing with a precise mandate, returned with a structural deal, and refused to turn the visit into theatre. The other went to Beijing with a massive delegation, an unresolved war behind him, falling poll numbers around him, and a Taiwan minefield in front of him. So here is where we actually stand. Canada saw the new map of the world first. Canada moved first. Canada came back with a concrete deal. And Trump, after threatening, insulting, and punishing Ottawa for doing exactly that, is now in Beijing to do the same thing. If he comes back with a deal, his threats against Canada become politically indefensible. If he comes back empty-handed, Carney's 4-month head start becomes one of the defining diplomatic stories of the year. Either way, the conclusion is the same. Canada read the new geography of global power correctly, and Washington is now playing catch-up. The world has stopped revolving around Washington, and the American president may finally be beginning to feel it. If this video gave you a perspective you did not have before, subscribe now, turn on notifications, share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this story keeps writing itself, and we will be here for every new chapter.